Hi everyone, welcome to our February episode of Coffee Chats from this wonderful location. We'll let you guess where it is, but hint hint, it's in Costa Rica. Well, it's been an interesting month. We've got a lot to share, but before we get started, we're going to be today brewing some coffee as we do the conversation. So over the few minutes that we'll be chatting, we'll brew some wonderful coffee. So before I start asking you questions, what coffee are we drinking? Whose coffee are we drinking today?
Yeah, so actually this month we've been drinking a lot of coffee from Los Cuarteles. It's a family of Doña Leticia and Don Mario. She has 4 children that are to different capacity involved in the coffee farming, and they have this red honey coffee that's super juicy, super fruity, and we've been really loving it this month. So yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna be brewing it with our typical Hario V60, and we'll hand grind it. We'll make it right here, and we'll tell you a little bit more about how our month's going.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool. So yeah, I guess as you're pouring some of this yummy Los Cuarteles into the V60, I want to start by the first question that's quite relevant to the coffee that we're drinking, right? So a couple of weeks ago, since the beginning of the harvest, we've started visiting a lot of our producer partners, visited Donna Leticia as well. What's the harvest update? What are some key updates from this year's harvest?
Thank you for asking. I think there are quite a few things that were really like distinct from this year compared to last year. I think one is definitely the harvesting schedule. Obviously, most of our producers that we work with are based in Tarasu, and they have actually been telling us that the harvest has been delayed almost by a month. And I, from our conversations from other regions, it's not necessarily like a nationwide thing, and I think there are some areas in the country where the harvest has actually not been delayed by that much, but maybe a couple of weeks or maybe a week. But in Tarasu, I think on average it's been delayed by a month, and that's like a big big mark, I think, in the calendar, especially because harvest usually only goes on for 3 months. So you can see the scale, the range, that the scale of that impact. So that has created a lot of uncertainty, especially around preparing for samples, and a lot of the cycles that happen afterwards are around the harvest cycle. Right? Any activities that happens afterwards are around the harvest cycle. So that's somewhat of worrying element. And another one is around productivity. Another impact of climate change. A lot of producers that we work with in Los Santos and Tarasu region have reported up to 50% of their harvest having been lost. On average, apparently across the country, there has been about 15%, so 15 to 20% cut. But in Tarasu region and particularly the producers that we work with, smallholder producers, have faced up to 50%, half of their harvest being gone. The reason being that a lot of people are thinking that it was the rain that kind of visited them in the very beginning of the harvest. Harvest season in Costa Rica, especially in the region that we work in, are usually dry. But this year it wasn't dry, and it had a lot of rain and caused a lot of fruits to even fall from the tree before it was even ripe to be picked. So there are 2 of the big, I think, impacts that we were able to see.
For sure. Yeah, and for anyone who's always curious about what's the process look like? What are we doing? I know in the newsletter you mentioned a little bit about people getting in touch with you. What are the different steps right after harvest that we're taking right now in preparation for the market?
So before we send out to our friends and partners in the market the samples, we kind of do an internal filtering process where we accept samples from anyone and everyone that's part of our network, and we cup through multiple sessions of cupping. And cupping, if you're not familiar, is think of wine sommelier. So you're trying to gauge and understand the attributes that this coffee has, but also the potential, right? So we do that process. Whoever sends us samples, we provide them with a feedback. Oftentimes, those are not like, number scores per se, but more of like, these are some of the characteristics that stood out from your coffee, and we think there's X amount of potential to be kind of like driven up if you were to work in certain areas better. So that's kind of like the recommendations and suggestions that we give, but as well, and at the same time also try to map in our head who are some of the buyers who've already communicated with us that would be possibly, that would potentially be interested in these coffees that we are currently copying. So we do that internal process, and once that's done, we kind of make a final offer list and then share that with our partners. There are roasters, importers, mostly in Europe and North America, and right now we're talking to a few in Asia. We kind of like build that relationship for them, and that involves us communicating with not only with our buyers but with our producers as well to know to let them know where their coffee is potentially going. And once the contract is signed, we make sure that the connection is actually built. So it can be in a form of a WhatsApp group that we create between the buyers and producers. So we are not involved in any kind of communication. We are happy to support, but it's somewhat of like a more natural and authentic relationship directly between buyers and the producer. It can also be in a form of Zoom call. We get on a call together. Our team will volunteer to translate. But it's also kind of more of an authentic relationship that we want to foster. So, and a lot of times, it's something that we are always advocating for. We want this relationship to be long-lasting. So, a year after year, we try to kind of help foster this relationship, because there's a lot on everyone's plate. Especially for producers and buyers. I think there's just so much going on their day-to-day operation. Oftentimes it's really hard to be proactive in this kind of relationship. So we kind of like support our partners along the journey.
For sure. And I think the coffee's almost ready. This is not measured, so we have no idea how much coffee water we're working with, but it looks okay.
Yeah. Let's see.
I guess one question that kind of relates to going back to us brewing coffee, but also talking about the idea of cupping table, is the concept of sustainability. In this week's newsletter, you put up, you shared a link to a post that you made a couple of weeks ago about the cupping table, what that means for sustainability for farmers. I think one of the things that I found most interesting in our visits the last couple of weeks is this question that you've asked a lot of producers about: what does sustainability mean to you? What is something that has what have you heard more commonly from the responses from our producer partners?
Right. And I think this is really interesting, because I think we've been engaging with different actors across the value chain for the past, I'll say, couple of years on the topic of sustainability. And I think personally, but also I think as a team, we've been just really curious to understand what is the way everyone defines sustainability. Like, for us to be able to get to a sustainable industry, we need to kind of have a coordinated action. But our hypothesis has been that there's just not a single definition of sustainability, let alone sustainability in coffee, right? So we have been asking our partners, whether they're importers, roasters, baristas, and producers, what sustainability means to them. And it's just really surprising, and not surprising at all, that everyone's definition varies so drastically. So for the producers, a lot of the times, as much as I think they bring up the environmental factor into it, they say, environmental friendliness on their farms, and creating a biodiversity that's that's friendly to the surrounding that surrounds their farm. But oftentimes the first thing that they bring up is actually the living income or the fairness in the market, which I think it's right? Like, I think it's one of the three pillars of sustainability: economic, social, and environment, and they go straight to the economic and social element first. While a lot of the times when we speak with our market partners, the first thing that they bring up is environmental issue and variety and the resistance and the qualities in cups that are linked to certain varieties that are more resistant to climate change, etc., etc. So I think, although maybe they will all actually end up mentioning all three pillars, I think there's nuance to how they bring things up, right? And oftentimes we see among producers of them bringing up, fairness in the market being the first one. Can we actually earn enough income from coffee farming for them to be able to kind of proudly say, kids, my kids can take up my farm because it's something that you should be wanting to do. Or even things like, social element, like I think gender element is another thing that a lot of, even facilitators brought up a lot. So these are two elements, I think social and economic are brought up a lot sooner than they start talking about the environmental element, which to them it's kind of obviously a way of life, especially in Costa Rica, a lot of people have that way of life, but at the same time, I think how they prioritize or how they structure things also give us a nuance as to what's more important to certain actors. For the coffee.
Yeah. Yeah, that was very, very interesting, and I think there's a couple of questions that kind of come out of that. One is something more personal that you've written about in this week's note. You write about this class that you're taking, Nora Burpee, and this class is focused around sustainability. It's part of the LEAD scholarship that you're part of, and you received this year and last year as well. How have the conversations been in that kind of setting where you're talking to different actors from different value chain in the sector? You mentioned a little bit about what roasters usually mean when they talk about sustainability. They think about like Rainforest Alliance or something very specific around certification or environmental. But I know you're talking to other producers and other people who are also working in sectors like yours. So how have conversations been in those environments, in those classrooms?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think maybe the context to the class is also that it's obviously taught in English right now, because I say obvious because it's a bad language that I say obvious, but it's a new class. It's only been recently launched, and now they're expanding to another language other than English. I believe that they're currently testing it out with Spanish. So most of the people that's able to take these classes are coming from a certain class, a certain region. Most of the participants, except for me and a few other, are roasters or coffee professionals that work in coffee consuming countries, or maybe there are coffee producing countries, but there are not as many people participating from there than I think the rest of the world, where their primary contact with coffee is coffee shop, right? So it's been really interesting to understand what sustainability means to them, because it's another audience. Because I think the roasters that I talk to, or the importers that we talk to at an organization like at Bin Voyage, is a bit more of the group that has been working in coffee for even longer than all of us combined, right? Like they've been going to origins to buy coffee, and they've been traveling a lot to meet different producers. So their perspective is a little bit different from like the class that I'm taking, because a lot of them are like rather new in the coffee industry as baristas, or maybe they're journalists that's just interested in coffee. So there was a varied group of people, and what's been really interesting for me is that things that I don't necessarily think about on a daily basis is a big decision for coffee shops, for instance. How they buy paper cups, where do they get their supplies from, right? Like things that little supplies and things that consist their coffee shop isn't something that I have any knowledge about. So that was really eye-opening moment for me to know, wow, there are quite a lot of decision making that goes into running a coffee shop for them to be able to say, okay, we are running a sustainable coffee shop. In addition to obviously like the sourcing decision, which I think is a big bulk of like their decision making, of like, even if you get paper cups, maybe that's only a small percentage of your budget compared to how you source your coffee that has like a bigger percentage of your budget, right? So like I think that was an interesting conversation to get my eyes opened up, because I also got quite a few follow-up emails later on, because I was one of the few people to be joining in from producing countries. So I was able to also share stories that I've heard from our producers, and like some of the good and bad practices that we see in our industry. So it's been an interesting journey to kind of learn by sharing, but also learning from their own experience. Yeah, for
sure. And being in that kind of different environment where it's almost like an interdisciplinary class, right? It's not sustainability from one perspective, but from that different perspective. I think that's quite unique. So that thanks for sharing that. The next question that I want to ask is something that you wrote about early in the newsletter, where you talk about how for the first time in many years our team has been able to see each other, and that's not been something that's been possible for many reasons, COVID, but also like we're a virtual team. We've done a few trips now as a team, different trips. Any specific memory that you want to share that and it kind of comes up and you're like, oh, that was really fun. Just wanted to kind of give you that time to share reflection.
Good question. I think we were thinking, or perhaps it's been like, what, 2 years or so since we were all in the same place. I'll do it again. I think we were reflecting on the trip that maybe it's been already like 2 years or so since all of us were in the same place, right? I think we have our Costa Rican teammates who are always based in Costa Rica, you know, holding our owners very strong. And both of us travel in and out based on our workload and task, especially because I think a lot of our job entails networking with people, attending conferences, you know, getting funders and hosting all those meetings and seminars. So a lot of the times our work involves going abroad. And also because our home countries are not Costa Rica, so we also make sure that we are spending some quality time with our family. So that's like, you know, another break that we get from Costa Rica. I honestly forgot how great it is to be working from the same place. And I think as much as we got really comfortable with the Notion, Zoom, and Google Drive and all the other softwares that we are kind of experimenting with to be as effective as possible as a virtual team, I think there is definitely a joy that you know, in-person presence, in-person meetings can only bring about. You know, all these small talks that happen, you know, off the camera or off the, you know, like right after a call or right after a meeting, like small talks of like, you know, checking in with one another, and those things bring in a lot of joy that I had forgotten about for the past 2 years. So that's been really, really enjoyable. And I think one of the, like, I think most memorable trip for me personally has been to Doña Erica's farm with Abby. So we went to the farm in 2016 for the first time together, and apparently that was the last time we were on the same farm together since, like, you know, this month, like last month that we went to visit her. She actually reminded us, you guys have come individually, you guys have come with different partners, different, you know, different teammates, because, you know, we will be taking trips. Abby will go with Fernanda, I had gone with Adri, and we'll just like take individual trips because we are really, really close to the family. But apparently since 2016, we've never gone back together. And that's the farm and that's the family that inspired Bin Voyage, right? Like that's that day that we spent with her and all the stories that we learned from her afterwards have really informed and guided us to become who we are today. So that Don Ruben and Doña Erica, they both brought up the fact that, you know, they clearly remember the day that we came visit, but it's also been like, you know, since 2016, both of them hadn't gone there together. Because they also keep a little book of visitors. If you visited their farm, you probably have signed it if it was your first time visiting. We kind of like stopped signing at one point because, you know, we kept going every month or so at one point. But yeah, they actually just like remember, you guys, that was the last time that you're on our farm together. And that was quite surreal because I feel like he's my best friend, and Abby's like my best friend, and he's also my co-founder, and you're like one of my only friends that I talk to on a daily basis. Like, I am not very good at like keeping in touch. You know, I love my friends, but I do not talk to them on a daily basis, and Abby, I do. But at the same time, even then, there were like this, I don't know, surreal moment of like, wow, like, yeah, we've shared so much, but then we haven't come to this farm where everything started since 2016. It was kind of an eye-opening moment for me. Yeah.
That was a very special day and evening. We spent quite a few hours there, had some fun. I don't think we drank coffee, but we had some wonderful food. Fantastic day. Well, February's been quite a busy month. March is probably going to be some more busy stuff. What's like a couple of big things you're looking forward to in March?
So March is Women's History Month. So obviously that's, I think, what our organization is for. So we are thinking of like different activities throughout the month. Maybe not a lot of like in-person stuff, but more of like reflections that we're gonna do with our team. And you can, stay tuned by following our Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and also YouTube now. And yeah, and International Women's Day is obviously coming, as everybody knows, on the 8th of March. There's not, I think, an event that we are launching in March. I think a lot of our time and energy right now is being spent on making our year look better. We are currently in the phase of like strategic planning for 2021. I almost got that wrong. 2021 for Beam Voyage, and we had just welcomed back Adriana from her maternity leave. So we're very excited to welcome her back, but that also means that we don't want to be kicking off with like a big event in March. This is like the time for us to nurture our ideas and get ready for April. So as I've shared in the newsletter, there are quite a few events coming up already in April, May, and I think moving forward.
Yeah.
So
there.
so we're really excited to be continuously sharing some events and some thoughts and programs with you. But for now, stay tuned for what this March will entail.
For sure.
All of us.
Yeah, as we always do, we'll be doing some fun stuff and just be sharing them with you all. But do expect that March may be a slightly slower month for us, public facing, but it'll be a great month for us to kind of internally strengthen our programming, our planning, our fundraising, and other things. So with that, thanks for joining me on this beautiful weather place. If you still haven't guessed it, do let us know where you think this is. Again, it's in Costa Rica, so it shouldn't be that hard. But we're here. Perk of working here is that you get to actually work in places that are some of the most beautiful places in the world. And thank you for joining us for this week of Coffee Chats. First time doing it in person. We'll see you next month. Take care. Bye.
Second time in person.